Welcome to Autistic People Talking, a podcast where autistic people talk. Hello, my friends. My name is Claire, and this is my channel, Woodshed Theory. Here, I make content about what it is like to live as an adult on the autism spectrum and whatever else feels good to me. So if that sounds good to you, or if you're feeling particularly gracious today, and I hope that you are, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, ring the bell. I almost forgot to mention that I put out videos a few times a week, so click the like and the share. Help out your good friend Claire. Everyone, welcome to one of my favorite things, my podcast, Autistic People Talking, a podcast where autistic people talk. Today we have a very special guest. It is Michael Coles from the podcast, the Deep Dive Podcast. Welcome, Michael. Great to have you.
I'm stoked to be here, Claire. I've just been sort of like looking forward to this all week. So thank you for inviting me on the chat.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet with you. I know that we've been working on getting this set up for a while, and you have in the past few months started your own podcast that focuses on sharing neurodivergent stories as well. So it is so neat to speak with a fellow creator, a fellow podcaster.
Yes.
I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners out there and tell them a little bit about your connection to the autism community.
Okay, so all right, so my connection to the autism community was obviously through the Deep Dive podcast. I had a meltdown in November last year after sort of like an episode at work where basically sort of like a couple of people left, and then what actually happened is basically sort of like they were putting on more work and stuff like that with me, and then I was sort of like, tried to sort of get a meeting and basically say, this is the way I work and all that type of thing. And then what actually happened is basically I basically had enough. And then one sort of morning, actually sort of like I text my wife, basically sort of saying I can't do this anymore. And then basically 10 o'clock, I rung the 13 health number, which is a health number here in Queensland. And what they basically suggested is they called an ambulance and they took me to a mental health care clinic. So their mental health care unit. That's sort of like, there's inspiration on starting the podcast. So I had to resign from that job because basically I had to go on stress leave and stuff like that. And then sort of like, obviously I tried to sort of like, I wanted to sort of like, share my experiences and stuff like that as an autistic person, a 49-year-old autistic person. So basically I was diagnosed 3 times, one with PDD-NOS back in 1978. So a pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, back in 1978 when I was 3. And then I got diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 35 back in 2010. And then I got re-diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder back in 2017. So it's basically sort of my way of sort of giving back and also sort of connecting with other neurodivergent creators or people with the autistic community that are really sort of like, making their way in the world. So I got inspired by people on TikTok. So basically I was just doing, looking at these people and then basically they're sort of living their best lives on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and all that type of thing. So basically it's my way of sort of connecting with them and also sort of like, interviewing them because I used to do community radio for about 8 years and stuff like that on and off. So it's sort of my way of actually sort of like giving back and sort of like letting them know that there's so many autistic creators out there and so many good things about the autistic community that it's so good.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I think it sounds like, it sounds like it's been a rough few years that have started to turn into something for good.
Exactly. So what I'm also sort of doing, which I've only just started with, I've started a job with Orange Elephants Creative Minds, which is I'm doing a client support worker for them, so I can actually help autistic people as well. And I'm also doing program facilitation at Empower Autism. So basically, I'm basically sort of doing some like presentations and also some courses and stuff like that for other autistic people, so they can live their best life as well.
That's really awesome.
Yeah. So
I mean, what else is there to say? That's so cool.
yeah, I'm really enjoying. Well, I haven't really started yet, but I'm really looking forward to sort of like, getting my teeth into it things because, obviously, you want to sort of, I'm sort of, it's one of my special interests of mine to basically sort of like, know about people and just trying to sort of really sort of like, drill into their sort of like, their special interests and all that type of thing. So that's why I'm sort of, that's how the Deep Dive podcast was formed and all that type of thing.
How has that been going for you so far? Has it been going as expected, or has there been any surprises with starting a podcast? And I mean, you're doing everything by yourself, right? As an autistic person, I
Yep.
I know how it is too. But how has that been for you?
It's going really well. I'm actually sort of really surprised on how exponentially sort of the growth exponentially it's going. So basically, I've now got just over 1,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel, which I think
Congratulations.
which actually sort of like really got sort of like, I was really stoked about. I mean, I was basically happy with about 93 listeners or 93 sort of downloads and stuff like that to the pod. So it's basically great to sort of like, get the word out there. And the more you get the word out there, the more sort of like, the interest that actually sort of like, and the sort of like the feedback I'm getting back. And a lot of it's been positive. Basically, sort of like, they're really keen to subscribe to the channel and learn more about the upcoming guests and all that type of thing. And so we've had some really good guests from both Australia and overseas as well. So I'm really sort of stoked about the podcast and how it's sort of exponentially grown. I'm hoping to monetize it at some stage, but we'll just have to wait and see. But we're on the way.
So I'd love to ask you about your experience going through managing burnout and
Mm.
rebuilding.
Yeah.
How has that been while you start the podcast and talk to people? I know you probably took some time, probably a few months before you started dipping your toes back into doing work like this or starting a new avenue. Um, how are you managing burnout through this time to make sure that it doesn't happen again to that extent?
Yeah, well, it's sort of like, the positive part is basically I'm doing two casual jobs. I used to have one full-time job. It actually works for me because basically I could sort of like, I could go down to like, 2, 3 days a week and stuff like that, or sort of like, just build up my schedule as needed and stuff like that and schedule rest as needed. I also have got to take my daughter to appointments as well. I go to a speech therapist like, once a fortnight. Also go to an OT once a fortnight. We actually just had a functional capacity assessment done back in April, and obviously that's identified quite a few things. We've got a sort of a program called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which I've just had a change of circumstance done with it. Getting the results pretty much at the time, well, basically after recording today. So hopefully there'll be some positive things out of it. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to sort of getting that. I do have a support worker coming. Basically comes that once a week for about 2 hours. So basically, sort of like it helps with executive functioning. Just trying to sort of like get obviously with two kids and stuff like that, they can be sort of a little bit full on. So trying to sort of like work out with my executive functioning, trying to sort of like sort out that. Just trying to sort of like just deal with things as deal with this, like try and keep the stress fairly low because I think with stress, I think sort of if I have sort of too much stress, then sort of obviously I burn out. Where it's sort of if I keep to a moderate, so like a low amount of not stress, but sort of like if it's like a good exciting thing and stuff like that I like doing. And sort of obviously it doesn't feel like a job, so it doesn't sort of like it doesn't overwhelm me as much.
Mm-hmm. So far it's been a positive experience.
So far, it's been a positive experience. Sort of like, I'm really glad that I actually got into it because for a while it was only accessing psychology and basically it was putting out fires at the particular stage. So, how do I sort of like how to describe it? It's like, now I'm not putting out as many fires or I'm not putting out any fires. And I'm more sort of like, just basically sort of like, rebuilding and also sort of upskilling and stuff like that to sort of try and cope with these situations as they come up. So, sort of sometimes when you sort of like, when you're in burnout, you sort of like you got no sort of capacity to sort of like deal with these issues. And now sort of like, when you sort of like, your executive functioning is pretty much managed and your anxiety is pretty much managed, then you can actually sort of like, build on, the skills and stuff like that that you already have and stuff like that. And you sort of like, look at things differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that it's nice to talk to you about this because obviously it's something that many people who are on the autism spectrum experience. And I know that one of the things that I'm constantly trying to do is manage myself and to like keep tabs on myself to make sure that I'm not putting myself into a place where burnout will happen.
Mm,
And it's a really difficult thing for me to accomplish because
mm,
I think that sometimes I forget to check in with myself,
mm.
and it's like a train going down the tracks with no brakes.
Yeah, no, because you basically your brain goes about 100 miles an hour and stuff like that, and you can't sort of like sustain it for that long. So, pure and simple, they're basically sort of like, you can't sort of like, do something at 100 miles an hour for too long. You're just going to burn out and stuff like that, and you get tired.
Yes, and I think I've had to learn that my capacity may be different than it is different than neurotypical people,
Mm,
and it's also different from anyone else on the autism spectrum.
mm,
So I have been going through this journey of trying to figure out what is too much
mm.
and what works for me. And I'm
Yeah.
still in the middle of it for
And I
sure.
know sort of it does take time to sort of like, sort of like, get to sort of that end game and stuff like that. But it's sort of like it is but it's sort of more a journey and stuff like that. So I think it's so important. What I've also sort of like, I've also joined a couple of organizations and stuff like that are online sort of people, which I've basically sort of linked up with. There is a neurodivergent, basically a human rights lawyer called Annie Crow who runs a group called NeuroAccess. So
Mhm.
basically, neuroaccess.com.au, where you can sort of like join the network. So you could actually sort of like, sort of like link up with other autistic and neurodivergent people and stuff like that. And they can sort of like, they've got sort of like, video events and all that type of thing, which I think it's pretty cool and stuff like that. You'll be able to sort of link up with some great creators as well. And there's
What
also
kind of
sort of like
services do they provide there?
basically sort of like it's peer support. So it's the peer support sort of thing, which I really like as well. So that it's you need that sort of connection with with other neurodivergent people. So I think it's great that sort of like, there's groups like that in the space to be able to sort of link up and connect and basically just, just basically sort of, you know, basically sort of like, vent or, basically sort of like air your issues and stuff like that, or air your, basically sort of like, the how people have, have not helped you or something like that, if that makes sense. So it's a good place to sort of like, create and basically you get believed and you get seen as well.
Right, so it's like, internal support.
Yeah, that's correct. There's another internal support business hub, which I've actually sort of, this is outside the NDIS, by the way, called Neurodivergent Business Collective. So it's ndbusiness.co. So basically, it's got run by a person called Adina Levy, who is basically I've known for just a couple of months now, but she's been really good. She's basically sort of like, she's got other neurodivergent businesses and stuff like that where you can actually link up with. So I joined there to basically sort of like, just try and sort of like, link up with other people and stuff like that, other people in the allied health space to either get guests or, basically just, trying to sort of like build up the podcast and stuff like that. And that's been really helpful as well.
I'm glad that you're bringing this up because I feel that I am not one to go out and, um, look for support on the
Yes.
internet. but it's not because I don't want to or that I wouldn't be interested in that.
Mm.
I just really hadn't thought about it before.
Well, you sort of like, I went to, well, firstly, I didn't even know about some of these things until I went to the Queensland Disability Expo back in March to sort of try and sort of find out what services are out there for autistic people and stuff like that. And I found this creator, basically this person called Corey Sherland who runs Talk, and I was talking to her about sort of, and she runs sort of like some group things and stuff like that. And she's obviously now works with me with Empower Autism as well. um, so she's been really good with that. I've also found my support worker, my ND and me, obviously through the expo as well. So it's sort of like, getting some information, then contacting them sort of like, after the expo has occurred, and then sort of like, putting and then basically sort of meeting up and just seeing what they're able to do and stuff like that. So that's really good and stuff like that. So if you don't sort of like, try these things out, you sort of like, you don't know the power of what they actually sort of do. So I think it's really good to sort of link up with these groups.
You're inspiring me to do that more
Yeah.
because it's not something that I'm trying to think about how to explain it. I
Mm,
think that maybe because I had no idea that I was on the autism spectrum, I just don't even think that maybe these groups are out there.
mm. And
So I think it's
basically
so
you
important that you're sharing with people resources because that's the number one thing I hear from people is lack of resources.
Mm. And I think sort of like these people sort of created it from scratch, which I think is pretty awesome. So it's not just people from Australia that's sort of there. There's people worldwide that can actually sort of log into the collective as well, which I think is it's really, really awesome. I know that sort of like these sort of businesses, little businesses, are out there to be able to sort of help these neurodivergent people through. And I know for a fact that these people are out there and are making a real go at it, which is fantastic. That's like
I
a
wanted to ask you, so you said that you originally got a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome when you were a little bit younger.
mm.
So how do you feel that that differs from an autism diagnosis, if at all?
Well, back then it was fairly demonized. So basically, back in 2010, there was this. I know there wasn't enough information on it to basically sort of like I think back then they were trying to sort of make you sort of act like as a normal person, and you
Mm,
can't do that sort of forever because basically it's sort of like you know obviously it's sort of the diagnosis of Asperger's. You basically sort of like you get this sort of like the diagnosis, but the problem was at that particular time, there wasn't that much support, or basically sort of like you sort of feel overwhelmed by the diagnosis anyway, and also the stigma attached to it.
mm.
That's sort of like sort of like you kind of sort of like I can't. That's why I kind of sort of buried it for a while. I had to sort of be in a little bit of denial for a while. So I finally got the courage to sort of go back to my psychologist back in 2016 when I sort of like had a work manager basically sort of told me I wasn't like concentrating, but
Mm.
but unfortunately, sort of like that's the bully and the manager for you. But I decided to sort of like, there was a sort of a crux to sort of like, get re-diagnosed and basically get the support that I actually need and stuff like that. But when I originally applied back in 2018 for the NDIS, I wasn't eligible at that stage. So
Mm.
now obviously now I've got this sort of like, the right support and then basically sort of access to it now, you get more sort of like, the vital support that you actually need. So I think it's rather important to actually get that support.
Yeah, I think I was curious to ask you if you found that there were any differences. I think that it has been important. One of the reasons that it has been important that Asperger's was moved into under the umbrella of autism.
Yeah, and that was back
Ha
in 2013 after the DSM-5 came in.
Right, and I think personally, I feel that one of the reasons that that has been so important is because it provide support needs to people who maybe weren't getting them before
Mm.
with only an Asperger's diagnosis. Would you agree with that or?
Yeah, there's a lot more support out there now, and also I think we're sort of creating a lot more acceptance and stuff like that of our community, which I think is really good. And I know sort of for a fact that sort of schools have, sometimes, I mean, sort of there's some really good schools that basically have the sort of like, the adjustments and accommodations there for them now. But there's still a long way to go because obviously it doesn't occur in the private schools. It only occurs in the state school system.
Mm,
So what actually but I think sort of like, there's more acceptance out there and there's sort of more realization that basically that more diagnosis is out there. There's more people discovering their conditions, especially like diagnosed ones. And they're basically sort of like, you basically sort of say then in your head, basically sort of, oh, that makes sense.
mm.
So now it's sort of like, I know it's not overdiagnosed, but we're trying to sort of like, more people are getting diagnosed, more people are actually out there to sort of like, there's more of us out there. So that's kind of a good thing to a degree, where you can basically link up with other people that sort of have this and basically sort of like, and it's kind of that self-awareness as well.
I think for me it's so important for people who have a realization, either self-diagnosis or official diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum. For me, it's very important to share my experience with other people
Mm,
because of what I went through. And
mm,
I know of what a lot of other people went through, feeling very alone and not having any support
mm.
and
And I think that
constantly,
support is very important too.
yeah, constantly being expected to be neurotypical and to live a neurotypical life and not being able to because I'm not, we're not.
Mm,
To me, it's important to get the word out.
mm.
And if I can help other people come to an understanding about themselves, then I feel that I've done something positive.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of like it's essential as well because it's sort of like, as more creators and stuff like that are going onto YouTube, which I think is fantastic as well. It's basically sort of supplies that validation and stuff like that in a sort of like, they basically kind of get you, which I think is really important and stuff like that for to link with other people and connect with other people on the autism spectrum. Because I know there's so many sort of positive aspects out there compared to what there was before. So and it's only sort of going on the up and up. So that's
Mm.
kind of a good thing as well.
Yeah, I think I've spoken about it at length, but I really did not expect that aspect of building community and meeting other autistic people. That was not something I had even thought about or considered
Mm,
when starting my channel. And it has been a very surprising, positive thing for me
mm,
because I meeting people like you and other people who've been on the podcast and people who subscribe or watch the channel. It's been um, really nice to know that I'm not alone and
mm.
know that not just that I'm not alone like in friendship, but also know that I'm not alone in my efforts to share autistic life with other people.
Yeah, and that autistic joy, I think it's so important as well because basically you can share it, and they can sort of like, they can appreciate it. They can sort of like, ride with you on this journey, which I think is pretty awesome and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's great that sort of these things are now about because you can sort of like, you can basically sort of like, this is other people and stuff like that that's, has autism, but they're living their best life out of it. So, which I
Mm.
think is pretty awesome.
What would you say in the past year in this kind of recovery period? What have you learned about yourself?
Well, I kind of firstly, I've learned through my speech therapist to sort of like, try and sort of calm my brain down a little bit because I know I do talk a bit fast and stuff when I'm really excited. So I try and sort of like, talk really slow and stuff like that with my obviously, trying to sort of work out some strategies with my speech therapist. And what also did is basically sort of trying to sort of work out aspects and stuff like that. If I needed to sort of talk to a person about an issue I'm basically having, we've got sort of strategies to do that. So it's basically sort of like, thinking of the points and basically sort of like, trying to sort of get the word out there. You do have to realize though that some people won't just listen to your things, and that's a them problem, not a you problem, because also the people pleasing aspect and stuff like that, I'm trying to sort of let go of that because at the same time, you sort of like, I mean, you being you, you need to sort of have control over your own life as well. Because I think it's sort of really important to basically sort of say, look, I'm really tired. I need to sort of like, rest and stuff like that. And rest is also very important as well for us autistics because we do tend to have sleep problems. Um, Especially when you have kids, but that's another story. Um, so also sort of like, I'm trying to sort of set boundaries and stuff like that. That sort of works with my autistic brain as well. So you sort of like, if one thing doesn't work, then sort of like it's no big deal. I was basically sort of tending before to basically sort of like, go whole hog on the one thing. And basically, if there's a big failure and stuff like that, then I was sort of taking things really personally. But if I have sort of one little niggling thing and stuff like that as well, sort of small sort of chunks compared to sort of like, one big chunk, then if
Mm.
something doesn't work, you can just, skew it around or just do it a different way or that type of thing. And also sort of like, I'm now with an employer that basically understands my autism and stuff like that. So I've written a couple of I met with a autistic peer mentor from Empower Autism, I think was last year, but they were doing in terms of employment. So basically, I put together like, a document sort of working with Michael, how my autism affects me. So I could actually share that with other people in my workplace, which I think is pretty awesome as well. And
Mm.
also sort of puts in a visual form because I'm a visual sort of like, I take in information more visually rather than sort of, basically speaking or, but it has to be speaking, but it's got captions as well, if that makes sense. Um, how to sort of describe it? Um, it's basically sort of like, the document's all there to be able to sort of say, look, this is what I can do, this is what my limitations are. And I think sort of it's very important for them to sort of know up front, rather than sort of like, basically sort of like, I didn't know that information up front, and then I tried to sort of present them to my last employer, and they didn't listen to me. So
Mm.
it's better to sort of get an employer that actually is supportive of your needs, and basically sort of like, that document is actually sort of really validating in a way. So you sort of can share it with other sort of like, people. This is how you can work with me and how you can get the best out of me, which I think is very important.
I've never thought about doing something like that before. I can see how it would be a very efficient and more comfortable way for everyone, for an autistic person to be able to share what their accommodations might need to be if they were
Mm.
going to be successful in a particular workplace.
Yeah. And I think it's important, sort of like, having workplaces that are supportive. I know there's still quite a way to go in relation to this, but there is supportive workplaces starting to pop up, which I think is really good. I know there's a few, um, there's also a podcast creator or an autistic person that basically sort of has a business that basically sort of employs mainly neurodivergent workers, which I think is really good. Sort of like, they basically can understand what you're going through. If you need a break, you basically just ask them, and then sort of like, if you don't have the spoons, you can sort of like, rest or, basically, or just try and sort of like, help people that sort of have similar things than you. So also the fact is that some things that you can do really well and stuff like that. In my case, I like helping people and I like sort of like, networking because I've done that before. I was in lines for about 6 years and stuff like that, and I practiced that craft. So you could sort of like, do that in the particular thing, only in short bursts and all that type of thing, and not in a quite noisy environment. But, you know, at the same time, you can get information and then contact them sort of afterwards and then sort of try and sort of draw into that a little bit more. So that's also a good thing. And I also like writing emails. That sort of my emails are my strength rather than sort of like, explaining things in sort of like oral format, whereas sort of like, my brain, well, front of the brain doesn't work with the middle part of the brain. So sometimes the thoughts can be a bit jumbled.
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm also a person who does better in writing, I believe, with my
Mm,
communications
yeah.
than I do when I'm speaking, which is another reason I like to do the podcast because I feel like it's a comfortable place for me to talk to other autistic people and practice
Yeah.
my communication. I did want to mention you were talking about autistic people in the workplace. I have very strong feelings that the autistic population of the world is and has untapped potential in the workplace, and I feel very strongly that uh, we need to be working on and working with employers to show them how much value autistic people could add to the workplace. I feel like it's an untapped potential.
Yes, definitely. But basically, you have to be in the right environment to do that. Open plan office space is not a great environment and stuff like that to be in because that's basically a noise killer. Basically, you've got too much light and stuff like that. And then also, you've got the fact that sort of like, um, you got various sort of like people that sort of, you got to sort of like, they basically got to have the knowledge and stuff like that of working for an autistic person as well. So you've got that sort of aspect as well. So I think sort of like us being in in a workplace in the right environment, we can actually thrive and also sort of
Yeah.
work into our special interests as well. Because I think sort of working to our special interests really sort of helps things move along, so to speak. And we can also teach people how to treat an autistic person as well. Because it's sort of like having that social awareness, I think, is beneficial for workplaces.
Yeah, and I think it's something I'd be interested in becoming more involved in. And I have thought more about the idea of working more in the diversity, equity, and inclusion work
Mm,
side of the workplace
yeah.
because the unfortunate fact that most autistic people are not able to be employed.
Mm,
And I feel that not only could they, with some I feel not very big changes with
mm,
some accommodations, they could really help companies because of the amazing things that we're able to do
mm,
and some of our talents. So that's something that I feel very passionately about, and I like hearing you talk about these different groups that you are working with or have worked with who focus on that because it's something that I feel like could change the society's view of autistic people and their worth,
mm,
which is I feel like could definitely use major improvement.
yeah.
But two, really help autistic people to be able to be employed and give them the independence that most really desire. And it's not maybe not independence that would look the same as maybe independence for a neurotypical person, but maybe independence might look differently for different support needs, but it would
Mm.
add independence that I think that people who are on the spectrum deserve and could really be good at having different jobs. So,
Yeah, it's very important. Also, the fact is that a lot of people are going into this self-employment space as well. So I think sort of having that sort of like they can sort of take control of what they sort of like can do and stuff like that, and work to their strengths as well. So that's another thing you could actually sort of do. So being and sort of like and a self-employer and stuff like that. For example, if you sort of like working as a sole trader, you could actually sort of like you can jig your hours. You can basically sort of have as many or not as many clients as you want. I know sort of like, there's a support coordination space and stuff like that that is run by autistic people, which I think is really good as well. So I know there's sort of more disability related businesses and stuff like that that they've got autistic people employed with them as well. So there is some really untapped potential out there.
Yeah, I agree with you on the possibilities behind being self-employed. Obviously, it's something that I decided to try out and go into that space. It's um it's been interesting for me, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I love that I'm able to play to my strengths and to cater to my needs.
Mm,
Um, but on the other hand, I also liked having an employer say, "This is your job. Do 1, 2, and 3. That's your job."
yeah. So
So
basically, just trying to have that define that definition and stuff like that, which is so important, and you know
right,
exactly what to do. So you sort of there's no ambiguity there. I think the
exactly.
ambiguity is basically sort of it's also a killer in the workplace as well, because basically sort of like if there's no content and there's no context in relation to that, then people can get sort of a little bit sort of frightened and all that type of thing as well. So I think
Yeah.
sort of like, you've got to have that control and you've got to have that sort of certainty around as well. So I think having that certainty really helps autistic people sort of basically thrive in this environment. Whereas, basically if you sort of like, have no context, or if there's sort of like, hidden agendas and stuff like that, that's also a killer as well.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for autistic people in a workplace, no matter what workplace you're in, not being able to understand the subtext of what
Mhm.
is wanted
Yep.
or how other people communicate who might not communicate the way that you communicate. For me, I think sometimes I struggle with subtle suggestions that aren't actually suggestions.
Mhm.
So I would struggle with that. So I guess what I'm trying to say overall is I think having the opportunity, I feel very grateful to have the opportunity to be self employed. Um, it does have its benefits, but it's also has a lot of challenges, which I did not foresee.
Mhm.
And that one of the big ones for me is if you are able to make your own schedule, um, then you have to make it and do it. And
Yeah, and I think sort of like, that can work with your brain as well, and also sort of if you need sort of sleep, you can sort of like, you don't have to sleep at other sort of like, particular times that, other people are expecting you to, but
right.
basically like, you can sort of like, have that extra rest if you need it.
But then I also struggle sometimes holding myself accountable
Mm,
to get the work done.
yeah.
I still
So
have to do it.
but answering to yourself, you don't need that sort of like accountability and stuff like that sometimes. There's also, in certain these groups, there's also body doubling sessions as well. So I think sort of like having the doubling sessions is really, really good as well, because it's sort of like, that also keeps you accountable.
You're you are throwing so many good accommodations and help towards me right now, so thank you, 'cause
That's
there
all
are
right.
things
Not a
I
problem.
wouldn't
Happy
think
to help.
about.
Definitely happy to help, because these things can be sort of like beneficial, not just for you. It's for other autistic people around the place. So I'm stoked to be able to sort of like help other people and stuff like that, sort of connect to these people, which is, I think, awesome.
I think that's why it's so important to talk to other, autistic people who might be going through similar things because, accommodations and support groups out there, uh, they can seem so unconnected and disjointed,
Mm,
and sometimes you might not run into a support system that you might really need if you're not talking to other people. or getting the information from other people. And because autistic people tend to be more to themselves, or well, not every autistic person, right? But I tend to be more to myself. I might not run into some things that could really help me if I only stay to myself.
Yeah, and that's also the good thing about it. You can sort of choose when you want to engage and how you want to engage as well. You can basically sort of like, it's obviously online, so if you don't feel like attending a session, there's sort of no pressure there. And also, if
Mm,
you feel like sort of turning your camera off and stuff like that to participate, you can too, and just
yeah.
basically participate in the chat. So that's the sort of the brilliance of having that sort of like flexibility as well. So you can actually sort of the way you communicate is you don't have to do it a particular way. You've got that control.
Would you say that you're more of a person who spends a lot of time alone in person, or are you like more social? Like, what does your,
It
if it's okay
depends
for me
on
to
the
ask, like, what does
situation.
your life look like?
Yeah, if I prepare for it, I'm okay to a degree, but basically sort of like, if there's a particular event and stuff like that. But if I'm sort of not confident of just doing it on my own without sort of like, knowing the people that are going to be there that can accept you. So sort of having that sort of like certainty does actually
Mm.
help as well.
Yeah, even before I was diagnosed, I always used to say, as long as I've done it one time, I feel okay.
Yes.
But for me, I always got like, I think if I haven't done something before, I get very preoccupied about planning.
Mm.
And
That's why I sort of also sort of I need to sort of plan to the nth degree as well. So basically, if I go to like for example, if I'm taking my family on a holiday, for example, basically I get these sort of like the hidden disabilities lanyards, which is basically the sunflower lanyard and stuff like that, which I wear, and also my daughter wears it. Also, we basically sort of like, inform the airline that we're basically sort of going, basically she's got autism and all that type of thing. So, and basically she's got level 2 autism. So basically, this is the accommodation which we may need. And then we sort of get granted or disgranted that depending on their availability and all that type of thing. But then sort of like, but all the time we've been granted that, which is, I think, really good. And basically, we sort of like, we check into the airport and then check in like a couple of hours early and stuff like that so we have a bit of a chill time around the airport so it's not quite as stressful, which I think is really good.
it's a struggle for autistic people to travel,
Mm.
and I've gone through those struggles, especially with the anxiety, behind it. I'm not as
Mm.
bad anymore now that I've done it a lot.
Basically, I know sort of like if you do it a few times and stuff like that, you do get comfortable. But obviously, when you have kids, the dynamic actually changes. You're trying to sort of
Yes.
keep them sort of like preoccupied and regulated and all that type of thing as well. And I like to sort of like plan sort of like things that are happening to in the day to the nth degree as well. So I know sort of there's no basically sort of like sudden changes. There's basically sort of like that expectation that basically I've got a little bit of a schedule to run to, which I think is really good as well.
Something I've been working on since my diagnosis is being with I've been working on it to different levels of success,
Mm.
is being more open to changes and being more flexible.
Mm.
And it's really hard.
It is a bit of a struggle, but it's at the same time, it's sort of like, if you sort of like, you do it once, you can sort of, or you do it a few times, you can sort of like, reasonably sort of adjust to it. But then sort of like, there's sort of some things that come up that you may be sort of not prepared for and you don't know what to do. So if you sort of like, if you know exactly what to do, that kind of helps. But if you don't know what to do, then sort of like, sort of like that can be a bit of a struggle as well. So it's sort of like, like the symptoms sort of fluctuate as well depending on the situation and the environment, so I think that's sort of rather important.
Yeah, I think I've been trying to, what do I want to say? In the moment, it can be very difficult if something is changing,
Mm.
and to be able to navigate that without having a very negative reaction.
Mm.
And I think most autistic people, I hope represent them correctly by saying like nobody wants to have a meltdown. And,
Mm,
um, I think that's one of the reasons it's really important for, autistic people to be diagnosed,
mm,
uh, or understand their diagnosis, because I think in moments where things are changing and you're not in control,
mm,
if you don't know that you're autistic and you start having a meltdown, it's not a nice experience to
mm.
have.
Yeah.
But if you do have a diagnosis or an understanding of that you are on the autism spectrum, it is it's not that you don't have the feeling of losing control anymore,
Mm,
but you have maybe the vocabulary to say that you're having a hard time.
mm,
And you also have more skills
mm.
to be able to navigate it better. And I feel like I don't know if you feel like this, but that's a part of my life that has been improved.
Yeah, you could sort of like, you can sort of like, build those skills over time, which I think sort of like is really beneficial as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've never spoken to anybody who said having a meltdown, especially in public, is pleasant. So
No, it is not a pleasant experience. And autistic burnout is actually real. So don't let people tell you otherwise.
I know it because I have lived it and also have uh, experienced it through other people. And the uh, maybe to people who aren't on the autism spectrum, maybe it might be hard to understand.
Mm,
Like I do try to put myself it's so hard because it's not my brain, but I do try to understand from like the perspective of a neurotypical person. Maybe it doesn't make sense. Like maybe it doesn't make sense to them because maybe they don't
mm.
experience it the same way, or they might. I think you can be neurotypical and experience burnout.
Yeah, but I
Um,
think so we've experienced burnout in different ways because
yes.
obviously the brain's going a lot faster as well. So you sort of
Yeah.
like, you got to consider that as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to take good care of your autistic brain. It's
Yeah, and I
hard.
think sort of caring for autistic brain is very important. And so basically, if you've got one brain and you're autistic, sort of you need to sort of work with that brain rather than sort of like work against it and sort of having a meltdown. So you need to sort of work with your brain rather than against it, which I that's my philosophy, I think.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you have been sharing about your experience with different therapies and speech therapy. Um, it can be really difficult. My goal is to be able to learn to communicate how I'm feeling better, and that can be really difficult when it might appear that I am not having feelings about something because I'm not talking about it,
Mm.
but I am having a lot of feelings about it, and I might be struggling to figure out how to communicate that to other people.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to sort of like, just work with your brain basically. Sort of like, sometimes when you need that sort of rest, you and basically sort of listen to your needs. I think it's sort of you could sort of like, it helps you to tolerate those sort of like, issues that you may have. So I think it's great.
Love to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk to you more about some of your special interests. What would you say your major special interests are, and talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so basically my special interest is really the podcast at the moment, which I'm really sort of enjoying sort of creating from scratch and stuff like that, marketing the podcast and all that type of thing and sort of creating sort of like, little sort of work shirts, which I've got right here. So it's an
That's
embroidered
nice. Is that embroidered?
that's embroidered, yes.
Not that's nice.
Yeah, I love doing that. So basically, I love sort of doing the side quests for the project for the podcast as well. So like doing the marketing, doing the interviews, meeting people on the podcast, which is I think awesome. Creating one of these deep dive masks. So I kind of got a mug club sort of going. I haven't sold anything yet, but sort of like I'm trying to sort of like sell these mugs, and they're
That's
available
nice.
via our website deepdiveau.net. So you can that's where you can listen to the podcast. You can buy the deep dive mugs. You can basically sort of like, join our Patreon if you feel like sort of joining our Patreon, which I think sort of I like to get some money back and stuff like that of the podcast as well, so we can actually have more awesome guests and stuff like that. Also the fact that sort of like, I'm really sort of enjoying the sort of like, the editing fact for the podcast, and also sort of like, trying to organize guests, which I think is also rather important. So
It's a job. It's a job, don't you
yeah,
think?
it's a job, but I enjoy that job because
Yeah.
it's sort of running along to my passions. So I think which I think is really good.
I think what's neat about you being able to do the podcast is um, being able to have, well, this is how I feel. Like, I like that it's it's all me, and I
Mm,
get to learn all new skill sets because it's not just talking to somebody. There's
mm,
so many skill sets that you need to learn between scheduling, marketing, different softwares,
mm.
different places to upload, uh, merchandise, like you said. Like, there are so many aspects to it that it's not just one piece. You get to
It's
do
great
like,
because you can go on so many side quests and basically said, "Oh, I've got an idea. Let's sort of like, run with that. Oh, and I've got another idea, and then we can sort of run with that and stuff like that." I've got sort of a couple of ideas up my sleeve, but I'm not too sure if I've how to design them yet. So I use Canva for some of these mugs as well. So yeah, so that's how I create
I'm a
them.
big Canva proponent here. Canva, if you're listening, sponsor me because
Yeah, exactly. They do the dishwasher safe mugs too.
yeah, I'll have to talk to you about that. But yeah, I love the aspect of being able to work on a project and have I don't know if full control is necessarily what I mean. I think what I mean is I love being able, as an autistic person, it really helps me to see the full picture.
Mm.
And when you're able to work for yourself and do your own project, you get to see the full picture.
Yeah,
And so
exactly. And there's no elements hiding from you. You can basically sort of like, this is all up front. This is like, this is really cool. And you sort of like, you sort of it's sort of like a sort of interesting sort of like, it's a fascinating sort of project that you like to do. So it's sort of like, it does become your special interest, and you sort of like
yeah.
you can easily become sort of really obsessed with it, which is really good too.
Yeah, and what has surprised you? Because I know as you've been learning about it, and I know you've done radio a little bit, and like, has anything surprised you on your journey with this kind of newer special interest?
I'm surprised how sort of easy it's become, especially with AI. I think sort of what AI is basically sort of like helped creators to a degree, but then you sort of like, you can have that control as well. So I think sort of like having that sort of like, degree of control, I think is awesome and stuff like that. So you can sort of know, you can basically sort of like, you could basically have that sort of control without, but respecting other people's sort of boundaries as well. But you've got to sort of, but it's sort of, it makes things a little bit easier from a creator's point of view as well. So you got that AI to be able to sort of like, switch camera angles and all that type of thing. So I think it's sort of fascinating to sort of find out how this newer software works and what sort of like new features they've got as well, which I think is really awesome as well.
How much time did you spend developing the idea, before you put it all out into the world?
Basically, okay, so what I basically had all these things in my head and all these ideas, but I didn't quite sort of like, work out an exact thing until sort of like, I was on my first podcast, and that sort of inspired me to create the deep dive. And then basically I gave a call out and stuff like that for, a particular guest, and one particular guest booked in. And literally within about 2 days of them booking in, I had the first episode of the podcast sort of done. And then sort of like I worked out sort of like, scheduling, and I'm also improving this over time as I sort of work these new features out. So it's it's kind of a sort of like, wait and see approach as well. So you could just see, if you find out these things, and then you sort of think, I should have done this before. You kind of sort of find out these new features which actually works better for you. So I think it's really surprising in how many tools there are now for creators to actually sort of like, create these things to a professional standard. And sort of
Yeah.
like but it's so easy compared to what it was before.
Well, I'm really excited to be talking to you about this because obviously it's something I'm interested in too. Oh, I guess I did want to ask you, have you found I have found that I have a lot of ideas. Um, and what has surprised me is that when I have the idea, I think it sounds so easy. Like that'll be so easy. And then am as I learn more about it, I think that is not as easy to do as I thought it would be.
Mm,
Have you run into anything like that? Like, for example, like when I'm setting up new segments or setting up uh, merchandise or anything like that. It's actually much more of an in-depth project than I thought it would be.
mm. Yeah, sometimes that happens and stuff like that, but it's sort of like, sort of with me, I was fortunate enough to sort of learn these sort of strengths like in the past and stuff like that that I could
Yeah.
use a lot in this podcast. So it's been a little bit easier and stuff like that having that knowledge, but it's also sort of like, you can sort of if you try it and it doesn't work, then it's sort of like you can do something else. That's sort of like, the beauty of podcasting and sort of like, video podcasting, for example. So you can actually sort of like, if you sort of like, do and then do one sort of topic and then sort of it doesn't sort of work, you could change it to another topic. So that's it can evolve and all that type of thing, and you've got complete control over that.
Yeah, I guess what I've liked about doing content creation is the I am constantly learning.
Mm,
There are things that I've been doing for a long time and that now they've become very easy, but there's always room for more learning and like more growth, like things could get better, and
mm,
I like that.
yep,
Um, I think because it's fun, but also very challenging to learn new things,
mm,
and it's very rewarding
mm.
when, like, you get to the other end of, like, your new idea and you're able to implement it.
And it's also important to sort of like, it's sort of like, a bit of sort of like, self-validation in a way. Basically, you've achieved something and basically, this is easy. Let's do some more of it and stuff like that. So you could sort of get that sort of like, self-satisfaction and self-validation, which I think is really good as well.
Yeah, it's like what I think what I'd love to, for listeners to take away is if there's something that you're interested in doing, it's okay to not be perfect at it at first. It's okay for it to start small and even incorrect and grow into something bigger and correct.
Yeah. And it does take time to sort of do that. Don't expect anything sort of too big because basically you're not going to get there in a certain amount of time. You could sort of like, start small and just enjoy the journey as you're doing it, which I think sort of like it's better.
Yeah, I talked about that recently on one of my videos. It's been really cool to look back at either podcast episodes or my videos and view them as like a progression.
Mm,
Um, like for example, you were saying when you started your podcast, it you kind of started the first episode and it kind of grew from there. When I started this podcast, I had Jen from Neurodivergent on as a guest.
mm,
And I know she's been on your podcast too. Everyone check it out. Okay.
yep.
Um, so when I started, when I did that video with her, I wasn't planning on doing a podcast. But after I spoke with her and recorded the video, I felt very strongly that it could be something
Mm,
and that it could be a really great way for me to meet other autistic people and have conversations with them.
mm,
Um, so it kind of grew out of that one initial conversation with Jen. Like, I didn't go into it thinking, "Oh, this is gonna be a podcast."
mm,
So it's been really neat to show. I mean, even today I was talking to my mom and she was like, you're talking to a lot of people." And I was like, "Yeah,
mm.
it's great."
It's great, isn't it? And I've been on podcasts myself, and then sort of like, being a guest and talking about like very similar things to what we were talking about today. But it's great to sort of like, tell your own side of the story from the other angle as well. So I think sort of like, sharing your own story in other podcasts means you can sort of like, you could basically tap into their audience as well, which I think's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I'm not a person who listens to a lot of podcasts, uh, but I know that a lot of people do, and, like, they like to listen to them while they clean or work or drive, and sometimes it can be really helpful for people who, um, use it as, like, a body doubling while they're
Yeah, and
working.
that's sort of like it's good to basically have that accountability as well. And they basically it's sort of like it's a friend and stuff like that that's sort of like, what wants to hang around with you, which is I think it's very cathartic too.
Do you feel like I know you've been doing the podcast for a few months now. Do
Mm.
you feel that it has changed you at all? Like, has there been any changes or that you've learned anything from doing it?
It helped me definitely with my confidence, especially when I was sort of like, looking for work. But also sort of it's helped me to sort of like, connect with some really awesome people out there. There's some really good, awesome people that are actually sort of doing great things for the autistic community. And it's sort of good to actually sort of connect with them and also connect with them sort of outside of the collective or, via Instagram or, via TikTok and all that type of thing. So you can sort of like, they can connect with you and you can connect with them. So it's kind of having a somebody that backs you up and also somebody that's sort of like, hey, I've been through that. It's kind of cathartic to basically sort of like, for other people to sort of be there with you, which I think is really good.
What do you feel like your goals are for the podcast?
I like to sort of like monetize it eventually and get some sponsors on there because I know sort of there's other autistic people. They're currently sort of doing it for no cost at the moment, but I know sort of some people struggle with employment. So having that sort of like income and stuff like that, I can sort of pay them to be on the podcast, for example. It's sort of like, I can sort of help it to be sort of like a sort of a little bit of a paid gig. It's not a paid gig at the moment because basically sort of they're giving freely of their time and resources and stuff like that. But it's also sort of good to, to support other autistic people and stuff like that and doing all this type of work as well. Cause I know sort of like, they're helping other autistic people, basically, you know, like getting the help that you actually need is very important. And like up until like back in like up until like, 4 years ago and stuff like that, that didn't even occur. So,
Yeah.
basically sort of like it's sort of like, more businesses are coming on or more sort of like, more people are coming online and stuff like that and just wanting to help other autistic people.
I
So
think
it's
that's a
just
great goal. Do you find that the your current viewers, are they mostly from the autistic community, or do you feel like or have you gotten any feedback that it's reaching outside of the autistic community?
I'm happy with sort of like, just reaching the autistic community because I was sort of, it's basically sort of, it's validation for other autistics and stuff like that. Even if they're sort of learning about their condition, it's kind of sort of like validating that they're kind of accepting it in a positive way. So, I
Mhm.
mean, previously there was a lot of stigma attached to it. I know there still is from certain sections of the community, but it's less and less now compared to what there was before. And there's more services out there that you can sort of like, you could connect with, which I think is pretty awesome as well.
That's really interesting. I'm glad we got an opportunity to talk because I love talking about doing content creation and I don't always have an opportunity to talk to people about it.
No, it's
Uh,
good. It's sharing knowledge. That's all it is and stuff like that. And we can sort of like, I can help you with your um getting some ideas out there as well. So I think it's sort of like, really good to finally connect with you because I've been sort of like you've been one of my sort of inspirations for starting the deep dive podcast and
that's
sort of
really
it's great
kind.
it's great to actually sort of connect and basically sort of like, you could basically sort of help them and just be internet friends and stuff like that, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah, I found that with connecting with other creators, autistic creators, has been really helpful to me. As I said, it's been interesting because I don't think in the past I would have been as open to reaching out to people or ask questions.
Mm,
Um, and it's not that I don't think I would have thought to do that.
mm,
I think I would have wanted to do all of the research on my own. Um, but sometimes when you're just reading, doing research and like reading, I don't always process that information as well um, as I do when I get words from other autistic creators who might have helpful advice.
mm.
And sometimes it's easier to, I just find that other autistic people explain it in a way I can understand it.
Yeah, exactly. And you sort of like just get you. So basically, you sort
Yes.
of don't have to sort of struggle with basically just explaining yourself to sort of different people and stuff like that. It's if they don't understand, they're not going to understand. If
Yeah.
people do understand, they could just get you. You don't have to, and it feels so much easier to communicate too.
Right. And it's also straightforward and done in a way that I can understand like right away.
Yeah,
So I like
exactly.
talking to other autistic people.
That's
Uh,
great. It's good. It's good to connect with and having a network of these people and stuff like that. Just really feels validating.
and there's not subtext. And
No.
that's something I struggle with when um maybe getting information sometimes is I'm also thinking like, am I missing subtext or is there something that I'm not understanding because it's not being said, it's just being assumed?
Mm.
I struggle with that sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's really good to sort of like, having that connection is so important because basically sort of like, people, with autism or basically have, basically knowledge of autism, they just get you. You don't have to sort of like, explain yourself and stuff like that. They just, they have the same things themselves or they experience the same things. So that's what's really awesome about it.
Yeah, I think we're all very different and then very similar at the same time. And the understanding that we have some major similarities, I think um, it helps put me at ease.
Mm,
But even though I still get nervous when I talk to people, it puts me at ease to know that to a certain extent, that the person that I'm communicating with understands what I'm going through. And that maybe it's difficult for both of us to communicate with one another, but we're like coming to the table and trusting each other. Like
mm.
that's helpful to me.
And that trust is also very important too. So, basically, autistic people are very nice people, I've found, because they're basically sort of genuine. They don't have any agendas behind this sort of like, ways of working or, way of like, communicating with people. And you can just be yourself. That's all you can do.
I hope that we both can foster environments where people feel like they can be their genuine selves and that's okay.
Yep. Which I think
Um,
is essential.
yeah. But I also I have become very aware. I'm sure that maybe you feel this way too. How scary it can be, like to be a guest on a podcast. I know that it's scary for me to talk on other people's shows or podcasts. So I try to remember that when other people come onto my show, they might be really nervous too.
Yeah, I think sort of like it's the nervousness, but it does tend to sort of subside once you actually get comfortable with a person, which I think
Yeah.
sort of yeah, and basically that sort of helps with the anxiety as well. And you could sort of like, and then sort of you got the sort of like as you get more confidence, you can open up a bit more. So that's
Yeah.
kind of a good thing as well.
Yeah, usually I try to if somebody does come to me, I'm maybe when people ask to be on your show, they might bring this up too. I try to tell them that if after a few minutes, it gets easier.
Mm.
The first few minutes, even as a host, are difficult.
Mm.
But once you kind of figure out the groove and start sharing, it does get a little bit easier to share your personal experience, especially because there isn't it's with autistic people, there's not much small talk, so you don't have to worry about that.
Exactly, and the small talks are basically the killer because sometimes you sort of don't feel like just chatting about just the weather. You want to get into the sort of like the nitty gritty stuff and stuff like that, and sort of blurt out your special interests and stuff like that. So, it's better to sort of like have those people who understand that special interests, or you basically being autistic and stuff like that, because obviously you can ramble on for ages or go on side quests and that type of thing. So it's really good that people sort of like, accept us pretty much for who we are.
Side note, I really like your use of the word side quest, and I hopefully have your permission to start incorporating that more into my vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. I know actually it's not my original sort of thing. It was actually an OT which I follow on Instagram, which basically sort of like, they basically sort of like, do these little side quests and stuff like that and they document it via Instagram. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's just interesting. You know, sometimes when you hear somebody use a word and you think that is a word I've been looking for,
Mm.
that's how I feel with you using the word side quest. I think I'm going to use it a lot now.
It's kind of sci-fi relevant, isn't it?
Well, I like sci-fi. So, are you into
Yeah.
sci-fi?
Not really. I'm more into comedy, but sort of like, I understand I've got the Dr. Spock ears, so that's why I'm sort of like, people sort of like, think I like sci-fi and stuff like that. So I know a lot of people, autistic people like sci-fi. So yeah, so that's why we use side quest. It's sort of like, it's very sort of Star Wars, Star Trekky type of thing. So
Yeah, also like video game culture maybe.
yep.
It's I mean, I guess before I was introduced to video games at all, I wouldn't have even known what side quest meant. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, sort of like it's good to sort of have a side quest and basically sort of like, a special interest doing it at the same time. And then basically sort of like, just rolling with it and stuff like that and just losing yourself at it. It's great.
well, Michael, I really want to thank you for coming on the show today. I feel like we've had a really good conversation, and I've gleaned a lot of information from you about different groups and services that maybe I could look into that would really help me.
Mm.
One of the things I always ask is if you had a short message for our viewers, something that you might want to say to maybe people who've had their autism diagnosis for a while or know that they're autistic, or maybe they're exploring that they might be autistic. What would your message be to the autistic community?
I would actually say there's basically a lot more support out there than there was before. I think sort of like there's a lot more groups that people can sort of tap into. There's also a lot of acceptance within the both the neurodivergent community and also the sort of neurotypical community as well, because I know sort of like, some neurotypical people have autistic friends and stuff like that, and they could just understand that. So it's kind of really good from both those perspectives as well. And also there's sort of like, there's more diagnosis and stuff like that, there are more access to diagnosis out there. So you can actually get that support in the first place. So there's more support out there than even there was about like 10, 15 years ago. There was those services are pretty much they were pretty much non-existent in those days, but now sort of like it's there, it's ready to be tapped, and you can basically just be sort of like who you are, and you don't have to change anything about yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great message. And I think that's what I'm taking away from talking to you is that maybe there are some support systems that could be really helpful to me that wasn't aware of, and I need to take the time to seek those out, that they might be, maybe they're not all perfect for me, but there could be some that
Mm.
really help me.
And also sort of like, all you can do is just have a look at them and see which is right for you and stuff like that. If it's right for you, join. If it's not right, it's okay. But it's sort of like, you've got that sort of like, you've got those options to access those communities.
You know what I think it might be, Michael?
Mm,
Um, when you do things alone for so long,
mm,
you don't really think about help or
mm,
support. And I think that maybe I fall into that camp, is
mm.
that I never had any support, so I wouldn't think to look for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to take some time and talk to me today. Is there anything coming up in the future or anything you'd like to say about your podcast or what's going on with you so that our viewers can check it out?
We are definitely looking for guests. So if you like to go to our website, deepdiveau.net, go to the Be a Guest tab. You could actually sort of book a time to actually sort of have an interview with me. And we can ask you all about your special interests and all that type of thing. So please feel free to reach out via the website, deepdiveau.net, and go to the Be a Guest tab. You can actually sort of inquire about being a guest, and we can talk about it. And I can sort of put some questions for you and I can ask them through the podcast.
What kind of guests are you looking for?
Pretty much sort of like, any person that's from the autistic community or neurodivergent community, even sort of like, specialists and stuff like that. I'm basically looking for anybody who's got like a special interest or can connect with this community. I think I like to sort of put as many autistic voices on the podcast as possible, which I think sort of like it's great. It's a great thing to be able to sort of like, profile their own YouTube channels and all that sort of like, what they do and all that type of thing. So we have people from all walks of life on the podcast.
Great. I'm glad that we clarified that because now it's anybody who feels like they have something to share or want to share. Please
Mm?
head over to Michael's website and look into being a guest. I think it would be a good opportunity to share your experience or special interests in a safe place.
Yeah, and I think instead of like having those safe spaces and safe places is so essential and stuff like that for that support because us neurokin we need that connection.
What a great term, neurokin. Well, thank you so much, Michael. We're going to end the podcast now, and I hope that everyone will leave a comment, let us know what you thought, and we will talk to you next time, okay?
Thanks,
Bye.
Claire. I was really stoked to be on the podcast.
I'm really happy that we made it work, and I'm happy that we had a really nice conversation.
All right.
See
Thanks,
everyone
Claire.
later.
Bye.